Well, this is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. Well, this afternoon, Theresa May is going to present her Plan B to MPs in the Commons, which will then be put to a vote of MPs next week. It's thought she'll give up on the idea of a cross-party consensus and instead try to scrap the Irish backstop from the current withdrawal deal in the hope of winning over Conservatives. She has tried that before, though, and didn't succeed with the Europeans. So should she succeed any more this time round? And if she doesn't, what are her options? Joining me to discuss that are Jill Rutter, who is the Brexit Programme Director at the Institute for Government, Mark Francois, Conservative MP and Vice Chair of the European Research Group, and Seb Dance, Labour MEP and Deputy Leader, in fact, of the European Parliamentary Labour Party. Welcome to you all. OK, Mark Francois, first of all, just explain what's going on, because people will have heard a lot about Plan B and a lot about it being amended and a lot about MPs possibly taking control away from the government.
OK. I think because of the complexities, it's best to sort of take this one stage at a time, Alan. So what will happen today is that the Prime Minister will lay a written ministerial statement to update Parliament on where she thinks things now sit. And she'll also, we understand, make an oral statement to Parliament at about 3:30 after questions, where she'll again explain to Parliament where she thinks things now sit. But the difference being, obviously, on the oral statement, MPs can then stand up afterwards and question her on whatever she proposes. Now, if we believe what we read in the Sunday press, she's decided, in essence, to bring the withdrawal agreement back for another go on the basis that she hopes to get further concessions out of the European Union, particularly over this very controversial element called the backstop. And we'll have to see whether she's successful in that. Remember, she said she'd do that last time, but she didn't really get anything that was legally meaningful. What we in the ERG have argued absolutely consistently is the only thing that would count, because it's a draft international treaty that we're arguing about, is if they were actually to change the words in the treaty. And we'll have to see whether or not, A, she's prepared to ask for that, and B, the EU are prepared to
which treaty are we talking about? We're talking about the Good Friday Agreement.
No, we're talking about the withdrawal agreement, which is what Parliament overwhelmingly voted down. The Good Friday Agreement is something completely separate.
All right, Jill Rutter, where does the possibility of Dominic Grieve and Yvette Cooper and Nick Boles taking control of the process come in?
So it won't happen today. So as Mark was saying, the Prime Minister needs to table a motion next week. We assume she's going to put down a thing saying, this is my Plan B, come and support it this time round. You had your go last week, said you didn't like it, but have another think. Maybe with some changes, maybe not. That will depend on others. Then what we'll see is a raft of tables starting to be amended, and that's where sort of Nick Boles and others are trying to take control of parliamentary business. So they're going to be trying to amend either the Prime Minister's motion or potentially the business motion that will enable discussion of that, to create a parliamentary window in which, rather than the government control legislation, which is what normally happens, the backbenchers can control legislation for enough time to put through a bill, which may be an Yvette Cooper bill, it may be a Dominic Grieve bill. I think they're sort of powwowing, as we understand it. We're all sort of just reading what other people are saying. They're powwowing this morning to decide on their tactics.
And is that legal, permissible?
We think it's procedurally OK. I mean, it's for Parliament to decide how Parliament does its business. So if MPs support the Boles amendment on procedure, if that goes down, then they can do it. It's unusual, because usually the government controls the business, but it's not procedurally totally unacceptable.
Now, what outcome, from your perspective in Brussels and Strasbourg, would you like there to be?
Well, me personally, I think that the outcome I would like would be very different to the one that Mark Francois would like. But in terms of what I expect...
Well, what outcome would you like?
Well, I want to remain in the European Union. I've been very
Even
clear
though the
about
British
that.
people voted to leave?
Yeah, they voted to start the process of leaving, yes.
What
leaving the European Union looks like now at the end of this 2-year process, whether that be a no deal, whether that be May's deal, or whether it be some other compromise that MPs may or may not, between themselves, decide is the best outcome, it seems to me unarguable that the outcome of that process not be put to the people for their final ratification. It seems to me a perfectly sensible democratic principle for that to happen.
But we've already asked them.
But in terms of, Adam, what you asked about what the EU outcome will be, I don't expect for there to be any change whatsoever to the text of the withdrawal agreement, because that backstop has been put there at the request, yes, of the Irish government, but that is, of course, because it's a member state of the European Union. There is no way that the EU27 are going to let an existing and staying member state fall by the wayside for the interest of a
are you
departing
asking
member.
for the impossible?
Well, no, it's important to realise what happened. The backstop was not unilaterally imposed on us by the EU. The British government partly asked for it. The Treasury have always wanted us to remain in the customs union. Well, they have. So the Treasury, and working through Ollie Robbins, the PM's chief negotiator, encouraged the inclusion of a backstop. Philip Hammond wants a backstop.
Well, hang on, Mark-François. I mean, as I remember it, it was one of the first things tabled by the European Union side.
Yeah, but with the encouragement...
For the reasons that you stated, that it is going to be their only land border with an EU.
But with the private encouragement of the British government.
I don't know that. I mean, that's a conspiracy theory.
No, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's what went on. Because the Treasury have never, corporately, the Treasury have always been against us leaving, right? No, you've got to let me finish my point. They've always been against us leaving. The senior civil servants in the Treasury have always wanted us to remain in the customs union, and so they, on the quiet, gave the EU the nod that they wouldn't object to. Why do you think it's in the treaty?
Let's ask Jill Rutter whether she thinks that's a fair assessment of what happened.
I don't have the evidence to say it isn't what happened, but I also think it is sort of, as you were saying, sort of quite conspiratorial, because the Prime Minister signed up to a bunch of commitments when David Davis was Brexit Secretary, Boris Johnson Foreign Secretary, in the December Joint Report, which is, after all, the thing that opened the door to the backstop. I think, actually, one of the things that did happen was, at the time, the Prime Minister was still, I think, was potentially persuaded by some of the people who were more supportive of the sort of Brexit that the ERG wants, that actually it was quite negotiable to deliver the backstop through the future relationship. Because remember, in her Florence speech, the Prime Minister set out a vision of the future relationship that involved the EU recognising an awful lot of UK rules, even though they were diverging from the UK. This thing called widespread mutual recognition, and that there were possibilities for sorting customs either through technical fixes or some sort of new arrangement, a thing called the New Customs Partnership. So I think at the time, I think people went into that backstop not realising how difficult it would be to find a future relationship that would remove the need for it.
I think my sense of it, this is morphing, it's changing. It's evolving from Leave versus Remain to the people versus the establishment. And the establishment, including a lot of very senior civil servants and some MPs in the House of Commons, have never accepted the result of the referendum and are doing anything they can, including parliamentary devices, to try and overturn it. And the ERG, throughout, have argued for what the people want, which is to leave the European Union.
This is what happens when the arguments are put forward. They fail demonstrably when put up against the facts. And then all you have to rest on is some conspiracy theory that, it's about the establishment, it's about a metropolitan elite, and then it no longer becomes about the substantial issue as to what is in the best interests of the future of our country.
But there is the fundamental
kind of
issue, though, of trying to override a clear majority in the referendum, though, isn't there?
No, there's no question of overriding anything.
Well, you say we're going to remain.
Yes, absolutely. But that's
that would be overriding referendum.
But I don't change my view if I lose a general election, if I lose a debate.
But you can have any view you want, but the people voted to leave.
Yes, I understand that. But what I'm saying very clearly is that you have a process. At the end of 2 years, you come up with something, and let's be honest, Mark and I would agree with this, May's deal is nothing like what the Leave proposition was in 2016. You cannot demonstrably argue that May's deal delivers on what the promises were made in the 2016 Leave referendum. Therefore, if we end up with a process that is not what people voted for, there is an unarguable case to say that the people need to vote on what is the reality of Brexit, what they are really being presented with, against the option of remaining in the European Union. That is not to override 2016.
With respect, the House of Commons understood that. The House of Commons understood, because a lot of MPs have read the treaty. It is a draft international treaty we voted on, which if we approved and ratified, we would be bound by an international law. Now, hang on. So that the House of Commons turned it down. And just while I'm on the subject, and forgive me, I've got to say this. 2 weeks ago on your programme, you said I was insane.
No, I raised the fact that...
No, you did, actually. No, wait a minute.
I asked you if you were insane.
And I said no, but
and I asked you because Boris Johnson had said to talk about leaving the single market was insane 2 days before the referendum.
Well, in good humour,
it was a joke.
Well, let's round it off. off in good humour.
Right.
The government lost by 230 votes, which is the biggest defeat of a government in the history of Parliament, and it's an open secret in the House of Commons that I, along with other very good men like Steve Baker, whipped that vote against them.
Yeah.
So we inflicted, with the help of others, the biggest defeat in here. So who are you calling insane now, Pat?
Well, I don't know. Well, some people might say as Conservative MPs to whip against their own party leader and Prime Minister is a bit insane.
Well, not when she's delivering a vote that actually breaks the pledge that the British people decided upon in the
And
referendum.
no deal does not meet those pledges either.
I just want to ask you, what is your attitude towards the report in the newspaper today of Mrs May possibly trying to change the Belfast Agreement?
Well, I think that would be extraordinary. I think that would open up a whole massive can of worms.
Would you oppose it?
Well, I don't think it's a very good idea. What we have said all along, Adam, we have been pretty consistent, to be fair, which is we've said the only thing that would legally matter, because it's a treaty, is if they were to change the wording of the withdrawal agreement. We've said they should take the whole backstop out. That's what we've asked the Prime Minister to consider. She needs to decide whether she'll ask that of the European Union. I think if she does, they may say no, but at least we would have tried.
What do you think's going to happen?
I think she might go and try. I think, as Mark says, the likely answer is no. Though one of the things that really is interesting is if the Irish government ever thinks we really, really, really are heading for no deal, that does create massive problems for them. Do they blink? I mean, that's one of the interesting
What about
questions we don't know.
the European Parliament? I mean, will they blink? Because we are 67 days away from leaving without agreement. That's what the law says at the moment. So will there be a massive effort from Europe to stop that?
Well, I mean, we've got to remember why the backstop's there. It's because of the Good Friday Agreement. It's because you need basically the same customs regimes on either side of the border, which being a member of the single market enabled, which obviously removed the checks in the early 90s. It wasn't the common travel.
Yeah, but it does have to be said though, that the Good Friday Agreement is basically an Anglo-Irish issue. It's not. It's not.
But it was drawn up in the context of both countries being in the same regulatory environment. It was also, incidentally, subject to a referendum. But yeah, what we've got is the backstop. Two referendums. Perish the thought. The backstop is an unremovable part of the withdrawal agreement. There is no chance whatsoever of the European Union agreeing to remove the backstop from the
If the PM
agreement.
comes back to the House of Commons and asks the same question, I suspect she'll get the same answer.
And
I would humbly say to a member of the European Parliament, which bit of 17.4 million people in this country voted to leave the EU don't you understand?
I mean, this is just glib nonsense. You see,
Well, no, it's not. It's the result of a referendum. It's not nonsense.
About the issue, and then you return to you're ignoring it. And I've already explained the democratic route as to why I'm not ignoring it. And you have
the
to remember,
democratic
Mark,
decision was
you
the
have to remember,
referendum,
Mark,
surely.
that for every 17 people who voted to leave, 16 million people voted to stay. So actually, this is not an issue that you won overwhelmingly. This is clearly an issue that continues.
The majority was over 1 million votes.
Clearly an issue.
It was
that
over 1 million
continues to
votes.
divide the country.
It was over 1 million, and even
it is
Diane Abbott
sensible-
knows that's a big
and
number.
It is sensible at the
it
end
was
of
a
this
massive
process,
majority.
It is sensible at the end of this process to say to the British people, this is what leaving really looks like. Is this still what you want to do?
No, this is an
And
established...
you're afraid of their response.
No, I trust the people.
Terrified
no,
of their
I
response
trust
on
the
that.
people.
Good.
The establishment stitch-up will not work.
Then we put the reality of Brexit up against the public vote.
I mean, it has to be said, if you do trust the people, why not have a referendum?
Because we've already had one.
Well, but it would be a double loss.
So you knock on the door, right? But think it
And
through,
then
Adam. So hang on, you knock on the door of somebody and you say, hello, I'm here to canvass you in the second referendum on whether or not we should leave the EU.
Actually, the third referendum.
Well, yeah,
because
and then the guy says, well, I've already voted in it, mate. And you say, yes, I know. And he says, no, hang on, I voted, along with all my countrymen, to leave. And you're only here because you didn't like the result. So I'm not going to bother to vote in your referendum because you clearly ignore us. And by the way, while I'm at it, I'm not going to vote in general elections either.
Mark, you're advocating no deal, correct?
I'm advocating a free trade arrangement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you honestly, seriously suggesting that the vote leave proposition in 2016 was the proposition that you are advocating now?
We said we wanted to leave the European Union. We want to leave the European Union and establish a free trade deal. That is that's the ultimate objective.
Fine, for
we're
you.
not frightened to go through a small period of no deal to get there.
That's not what
we are going to have to leave it there.
No, people voted to leave. Full stop.
I am afraid
Suck it up.
We are going to have to leave it there. Okay. This.